Michelle Mone is a Tory peer put into the House of Lords by David Cameron. She made her £20 million fortune through various businesses, including the lingerie brand Ultimo, and she's married to a billionaire. Doug Barrowman is a Scottish businessman who made his money through property and investment management. But all that money wasn't enough for this super rich couple, and the pandemic proved the perfect opportunity for profiteering. A Guardian investigation has revealed that Mone lobbied ministers on behalf of a PPE company. PPE MedPro was run by a friend of her and her husband's, and Mone asked ministers to award a contract to it 5 days before it was even incorporated. The report goes on to say this. Lady Mone's support helped the company, PPE MedPro, secure a place in a VIP lane the government used during the coronavirus pandemic to prioritise companies that had political connections. It then secured contracts worth more than £200 million. Documents seen by The Guardian indicate tens of millions of pounds of PPE MedPro's profits were later transferred to a secret offshore trust of which Mone and her adult children were the beneficiaries. They state that Mone's husband, the Isle of Man-based financier Douglas Barrowman, was paid at least £65 million in profits from PPE MedPro and then distributed the funds through a series of offshore accounts, trusts and companies. So, in total, Mone and her children appear to have secretly received £29 million in PPE MedPro profits. And to add insult to injury, it also turned out that a lot of the PPE provided was useless. £122 million of the money paid to the company was for 25 million surgical gowns, which failed the government's quality checks. PPE MedPro has refused to return the funds, and the government is still trying to claw them back. So, which minister did Mone lobby for this disastrous deal? Well, it was none other than Michael Gove, who was chair of the COVID response committee. That's now raising questions about whether Gove bypassed formal channels to help Mone out, which led to this awkward interview on Sky News this week.
Well, during the pandemic, there were lots of people who were approaching us with offers of PPE. I referred all of them to the appropriate civil service channels in order to make sure that the PPE that we were being offered was of sufficient quality and could be sourced in time. It was a procurement process which every offer went through in order to assess.
But she did approach you with your personal email, no?
Well, lots of people approached me.
Personal email?
Yeah, there were lots of people who approached me, whether it was through email, text, or in the precincts of the House of Commons or wherever, to say that they could help us. Because, as you'll remember at the time, not just in the United Kingdom, but across Europe, we needed to source PPE quickly. And anyone who approached me, I said, thank you very much, and made sure that their efforts to help were referred to the appropriate, officially run, independent channel to assess whether or not the PPE that they were offering was value for money.
So what do you remember about the personal email that she sent you?
That she was one of a huge number of people who were approaching the government at the time, who were...
So you don't remember specifically her approaching you?
I remember lots of people approaching me.
Do you remember her specifically approaching you?
I do remember. The thing about Baroness Mone is that, as you know, she's a strong personality. But there were lots and lots of other people who approached me as well. Anyone who approached me, I thanked and then made sure that they went through the appropriate process so that anyone's claim was assessed not by me as an individual, but by an independent process.
Okay, but what do you remember about her personal approach to you? What do you remember about that email?
I remember that she was keen to ensure that PPE, which the government needed at that time, was provided.
The government has so far refused to publish correspondence between Mone and government ministers, which led Angela Rayner to table this urgent question in Parliament on Thursday.
Last night, documents seen by The Guardian revealed that yet another case of taxpayers' money was wasted, a total failure of due diligence and a conflict of interest at the heart of government procurement. In May 2020, PPE MedPro was set up and given £203 million in government contracts after a referral from a Tory peer. It now appears that tens of millions of pounds of that money ended up in offshore accounts connected to the individuals involved. Profits made possible through the company's personal connections to ministers and the Tories' VIP lane that was declared illegal by the High Court. Yet ministers are still refusing to publish correspondence relating to the award of the MedPro contract because they say, Mr. Speaker, the department is engaged in a mediation process. Can the Minister today tell us if that mediation process has reached any outcome and what public funds have been recovered, if any?
The government spokesperson in the Commons, Health and Social Care Minister Neil O'Brien, avoided answering that question in any meaningful way. But PPE MedPro has been under investigation by the National Crime Agency since earlier this year. As part of that investigation, Mone's Isle of Man mansion was raided in April. But Mone and Barrowman have always denied any wrongdoing. The Guardian reports this. A lawyer for Mone said, "There are a number of reasons why our client cannot comment on these issues, and she is under no duty to do so." They go on, a lawyer who represents both Barrowman and PPE MedPro said that a continuing investigation limited what his clients were able to say on these matters, and he added, "For the time being, we are also instructed to say that there is much inaccuracy in the portrayal of the alleged, quote, facts, and a number of them are completely wrong." They go on. Mone, 51, and Barrowman, 57, have over the last 2 years repeatedly insisted they had no involvement in PPE MedPro and no role in the process through which the company was awarded its government contracts. PPE MedPro has repeatedly refused to identify its mystery backers, but denied it was awarded contracts because of company or personal connections to the UK government or Conservative Party. In January, the House of Lords launched an investigation into Mone's conduct, and Mone hasn't spoken publicly about the matter since then. That is until yesterday, when she posted this on social media. Don't believe everything you read or everything you think. Now, don't believe everything you read. I see that. Don't believe everything you think. It's quite meta. I'm not sure what I think about that. Aaron, do you believe everything you think?
Do I believe everything? I think maybe all that Botox she's using has gone to her head. It's obstructing clear thinking. But then maybe she's kind of having doubts about her own thought process. Don't believe everything you think. Bizarre. I mean, how does somebody like that become a lifelong legislator? This whole episode is just completely insane. We have, over the last 2 years in particular, heard so many stories about elite level, quote unquote, corruption. I'm not going to, insinuate she's done anything criminal because we don't know that. But clearly there are questions that need to be answered in this particular instance. But we've heard that so many times, and yet there haven't really been massive implications for people.
All the outrage about the PPE procurement, I haven't often got as outraged as other people have. And I say this because, the argument is always made that procurement wasn't done properly. I'm like, well, it was the start of the pandemic. It wasn't completely unforeseen circumstance. I mean, we can have a debate about whether or not they should have foreseen it, but I mean, it was, as a matter of fact, unforeseen. And they ended up doing a lot of things by WhatsApp and on the hoof. And I kind of have some sympathy for that. It doesn't strike me as completely unreasonable that one would have a VIP lane. I mean, obviously, it being called a VIP lane looks bad. I'm not sure if it was the government who called it that or if it was the press who called it that after the fact. But if you're asking for procurement, or if you're asking for people to offer you PPE who've never even made PPE, and remember, that's what we needed to happen, then it makes sense you say, well, we actually can vouch for this person. Because you could also call it a vouched for lane, right? So the existence of a vouched for lane, I don't think is particularly concerning in and of itself. I always thought with this story, though, what was more interesting was less like the government processes and more these people who are completely exploiting the situation. So I don't think there was enough sort of populist anger about the people who were getting incredibly rich off the COVID pandemic, basically by defrauding the state. And I think that matters not because, I don't just want to make a villain of Michelle Mone. She's just one of many people who, don't seem, what can I say, honourable, don't seem particularly honourable, let's say. But there are a lot of people like that in the British ruling class, people who are, out to exploit the public purse. Again, I don't want to say I know who is guilty or not guilty in this case, but I mean, when you've got, just even these sentences that if profits are ever transferred to a secret offshore trust, I think you should have some questions and some concerns. And so I think that's very much what's happened here. I mean, you can make a broader point about having sort of like a neoliberal state, which is reliant on constantly procuring things from private individuals, that you will end up with well, I don't want to say scammers again, because there has been no judgment made, but it doesn't seem like this was a particularly mutually beneficial transaction. It seemed like one party benefited a lot and we all got screwed over. So I suppose that's what I think about it. I think it's a window into sort of a particular class of people in Britain who are out or seem to be out for themselves, and we're getting screwed over for whatever reason. Focusing on Michelle Mone, though, because we do have a bit more information on her. She is a colourful character. She recently paid more than £50,000 to settle a claim made against her for allegedly sending a racist text. The dispute began in 2019 when a yacht belonging to a friend of Mone's crashed into another yacht, guess where? In Monaco. A crew member died in the accident, but it was what Mone said to a passenger on the other yacht that got Mone into trouble. The man on the other yacht was called Richard Linton Jones. He is a wealth manager who is of Indian heritage, which is relevant for the next part of the story. This is from The Times. Linton Jones, who was a guest on the other boat, told the peer, in a WhatsApp, the peer being Mone, in a WhatsApp exchange that his partner had been traumatized, adding, quote, "I would prefer you back the F off." In Mone's alleged reply, she is said to have written, quote, "You're a lowlife, a waste of a man's white skin, so don't give us your lies, you're a total disgrace," unquote. In other WhatsApp messages, Mone allegedly described Linton Jones's partner as a, quote, "mental loony and a nutcase bird." Now, the article goes on to say this. Referring to the allegation in an Instagram post in December, Mone said, quote, "Since when did calling out a man on his actions, his entitled white privilege, constitute racism? Quite the opposite. The accusations I have read today against me are full of contradictions." She has also claimed that Linton Jones, who is of Indian heritage, has an appearance that is 100% white. In a previous statement, Baroness Mone says she is 100% not racist. It added, Baroness Mone and her husband have built over 15 schools in Africa in the past 3 years. There's not much to say about this story beyond, Aaron, what do you make of it? She seems to think that she's calling out someone's white privilege, even though they're of Indian heritage, by saying you're a waste of a white man's skin. Is that ever a phrase that you would use as an anti-racist? What could that possibly mean that isn't a little bit racist?
Well, I think the African schools one is quite funny as well, Michael. It's like Cecil Rhodes. This is the white man's burden. How could I be a racist? I built all these schools. Well, actually, discourse is around helping people in the global south because they're incapable of helping themselves. Yes, that is historically enmeshed within racist discourse. Yeah, she doesn't strike me as a particularly nice person, Michael, I have to be honest.
Remember, everyone always talks about the degrading of standards in politics. This was the caliber of person who was given a peerage by David Cameron. Now, this was supposed to be the competent sensibles, handing out peerages left, right, and centre to people like this. So I think that's kind of what we should learn from this. Not necessarily, you always have to fill out the proper forms, even in the middle of a pandemic, but don't assume that because someone has been vouched for by a Tory, they're going to be anything other than exploitative, let's say. That's probably fair. I can probably say exploitative, can't I? Even if I can't say scammer.